I left the hospital room for less than 5 minutes. Just a quick walk down the hall, a paper cup of burnt coffee in my hand, the kind that tastes more like cardboard than caffeine. When I pushed the door open again, my heart stuttered. My mother-in-law was sitting in my chair, her hand clasped tightly around my son's small fingers. She leaned close to him, whispering like she was the only parent he had. The monitor beeped steadily in the background, but in my chest everything went off beat. I froze. My eyes darted from the half-empty cup in my hand to the sight in front of me. She looked up just enough to meet my gaze. There was no guilt in her face, only something sharp, triumphant. "He only needs me," she said softly, but loud enough for the nurse standing near the foot of the bed to hear. My throat tightened. I wanted to shout, to tell her to move, but the words stuck somewhere between my ribs and my tongue. The nurse shifted her weight, eyes flicking between us. She knew I was the mother. Everyone in that room knew it. Yet somehow, I had been erased in the space of a coffee break. I stood there, trying not to shake, the smell of disinfectant heavy in the air, the fluorescent lights too bright on my skin. I set the cup down on the table with more force than I intended. The lid popped, and a little brown liquid bled across the white napkin. My mother-in-law didn't move. She kept stroking my son's hand like it was hers to claim. That moment was the crack. The fracture I couldn't glue back together with polite smiles and swallowed words. I didn't react then. Not fully. I just stared, let the silence stretch, and filed the betrayal deep inside me. But what I didn't expect was how quickly that silence would turn into resolve. I should rewind. You might think hospital rooms bring families together. Movies tell you people cry, hold hands, forgive each other under the harsh hum of machines. That's not how it felt for me. For me, it was a stage, and my mother-in-law had always been waiting for the spotlight. My son was recovering from surgery, a small procedure, but still frightening for a 10-year-old. I had spent the last 48 hours by his bed, eating vending machine crackers, brushing my teeth in the family bathroom, listening to the steady chorus of beeps and hisses that only hospitals produce. Every second was heavy, but I stayed because I am his mother. That's what mothers do. When she arrived, I told myself it was fine. She is his grandmother, after all. She brought a tote bag full of magazines and snacks, acting helpful, acting generous. I even thanked her. But from the moment she stepped in, she claimed the air around my son like it was hers. She adjusted his blanket before I could. She poured water into his cup, hovering over him while I was trying to coax him to sip. She asked the nurse questions that should have been mine to ask. I tried to smile. I tried to keep peace. That's what I always do with her. But peace with her is just surrender in a prettier dress. That morning, when I finally left to grab coffee, I thought I was safe to breathe for a few minutes. He was asleep, the nurse was charting notes, and she was flipping through a magazine. I believed she would stay in her chair, that she would behave like a visitor, not a replacement. I was wrong. When I came back, the scene had shifted. I had been written out of my own story in less than the time it takes to wait in line at the hospital cafe. The thing is, this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 10th. For years, she has drawn invisible lines that always end with me outside of them. At birthdays, she tells me how she decorated cakes better when her son was young. At Christmas, she insists on family photos where she stands right next to my husband and I am nudged to the side. At Thanksgiving, she calls herself the real matriarch and gives me that smile, the one that looks sweet to outsiders but cuts like glass to me. Every holiday, every gathering, she takes something small from me. A seat, a roll, a moment. And I have let it slide, telling myself it was easier than making a scene. But in that hospital room, with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of my son's shallow breathing, I understood something different. She wasn't just pushing me aside for tradition's sake. She was replacing me. I sat down slowly on the edge of the extra chair, the plastic creaking beneath me. My hands curled tight in my lap. I looked at my son's pale face, then at the woman who had decided to rewrite what mother meant. My lips pressed into a smile, so thin it could have sliced paper. I whispered, "Interesting. You managed to replace me in less than 5 minutes." Her eyes flickered, just briefly, before she smoothed her expression back into that innocent concern. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The nurse looked down, shuffling papers on the clipboard, as if pretending she hadn't witnessed the shift. Standing on the edge of my own motherhood, staring at a woman who wants to erase me, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. Not yet. But inside me, something cold and sharp had settled. I knew then that my silence was ending. The only question left was how loud my next move would be. The truth is, the hospital wasn't supposed to feel like a battlefield. When we first came in, I told myself it was just a routine procedure. Nothing major. That is what the doctor said anyway. A simple surgery, in and out in a few hours, a night or two of observation. My son was nervous, but I promised him it would be fine. We packed a small bag together, his favorite hoodie, the one with the baseball logo, and a pair of fuzzy socks he refused to sleep without. I brought his sketchbook and some colored pencils because he liked to draw superheroes whenever he was scared. I wanted him to feel safe, to feel that this was just a temporary stop, not a permanent memory etched into his young mind. The morning of the admission, the hospital smelled of hand sanitizer and fresh coffee. The lobby was too bright, too loud, people wheeling carts and children dragging stuffed animals by the arm. I signed papers at the desk, my hands shaking only a little. He clung to me as we walked toward the elevator. I kept whispering, "You are brave, you are strong, you'll be back home before you know it." His small nod was enough to make me believe it myself. Inside the room, before surgery, the nurse put a plastic bracelet around his wrist. I checked it twice, like somehow reading his name over and over would guarantee they took care of him. He looked so small on that big hospital bed. His eyes darted to me every few seconds, searching for reassurance. I smiled, even though my stomach was in knots. I brushed his hair back, kissed his forehead, and said, "I will be right here when you wake up." I meant it with every fiber of my being. My mother-in-law arrived later, her entrance as dramatic as always. She carried a tote bag filled with crossword puzzles, snacks, and a sweater she claimed would keep her grandson warm. Her voice carried through the hall before she even stepped into the room. She hugged him like she was the one who had stayed up the night before comforting him. She fussed over the blankets, the pillows, even the position of the IV pole. I let her, because fighting her in front of my son would have only made things worse. But I felt her presence pushing into my space like smoke filling a room. Every move I made, she copied, as though to prove she could do it better. Still, in those first hours, I told myself it was harmless. She was family, she loved him. Maybe she just didn't know how to step back. I focused on my son, who squeezed my hand and whispered that he was scared. I told him stories about the baseball game we would go to when he got better. I promised him ice cream and a movie night, anything to make him smile. He managed a small grin, and for a moment, I forgot about the woman sitting across the room, flipping through her crossword as if she had earned the right to be there. The surgery went well, or at least that is what the doctor said when he came out to speak to us. "Everything looks good," he told me. "He'll be a little groggy, but he's fine." Relief washed over me so hard my knees almost buckled. My mother-in-law clapped her hands together, as if she had been the one praying by his bed. I barely noticed. I just wanted to see my son again. When they wheeled him back in, his eyelids heavy, his face pale but calm, I leaned close and whispered, "I'm right here." He nodded slightly, before drifting back to sleep. The first night was long. Machines beeped at irregular intervals. The nurse came in every hour, and my son whimpered whenever he shifted. I didn't sleep. I sat upright in the chair, holding his hand, counting every breath. My mother-in-law had gone home then, saying she needed rest, but promising she would return in the morning. I was almost grateful for the quiet. Alone, I could just be his mother without performing for anyone else. By the second day, exhaustion was crawling under my skin. I had eaten nothing but stale crackers from the vending machine. My hair was greasy, my eyes red from crying when no one was looking. Still, I stayed strong for him. That morning, after he had drifted into a deeper sleep, the nurse encouraged me to stretch my legs. "Go get a coffee," she said kindly. "We'll keep an eye on him." I hesitated. Leaving him even for a moment felt like breaking a promise. But the rational part of me knew I needed a breath of air, a sip of caffeine. My body was failing me. I whispered to my son, "I'll be right back," even though he couldn't hear me through the haze of medication. That's why I left the room, just for coffee, just for 5 minutes. I thought it was safe. I thought he would be fine. What I didn't expect was to come back and find her in my chair, holding his hand, speaking words that made it sound like I had never been there at all. That was the twist. The betrayal that stung more than any exhaustion. Because in that small window of absence, she seized the opportunity to erase me, to paint herself as the one who mattered most. Looking back, maybe I should have known. There had been signs. She had always wanted to claim pieces of him as hers. At family dinners, she introduced him to neighbors as my boy instead of my grandson. She corrected me when I explained his allergies, as if she knew better. She gave him gifts that felt like bribes, expensive gadgets I never approved of, and then smirked when he ran to her with excitement. Every gesture was a quiet attempt to shift loyalty. I had noticed, but I never imagined she would try something so blatant, especially not in a hospital, when he was vulnerable and I was stretched thin. In those minutes before I returned with the coffee cup, she must have been rehearsing it in her mind, sliding into the seat, leaning in close, whispering words she knew I would hear. It was a performance, a declaration that she could take my place if she wanted. And that thought, that poisonous seed, took root in me. Because it wasn't just about the chair, or the hand she held, or the smug tilt of her chin. It was about her willingness to erase me entirely, to claim the role that only belonged to me. I didn't confront her fully then. I couldn't, not with my son lying between us, fragile and recovering. But the damage had been done. The line had been crossed. I knew the next steps would no longer be about keeping peace. They would be about reclaiming my place, loudly and clearly, in front of everyone who dared to forget it. The sound of the monitor filled the silence. That steady beeping, mechanical and cold, was the only proof that time was still moving while my world stood still. I sat back in the chair opposite her, hands tight in my lap, and watched her fingers trace lazy circles over my son's skin. She didn't even look at me when she said it. He only needs me. The words sliced sharper than any scalpel. My son's eyelids fluttered, his lips parted slightly, as if he had heard something, but he didn't wake. The nurse, still standing by the foot of the bed, shifted her weight. She coughed softly, her gaze fixed on the clipboard in her hands, but I caught the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She knew. Everyone in that room knew. I was the mother. Yet my place had been stolen in plain sight, with just a sentence and a chair. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. The cup of coffee sat abandoned on the table, the brown stains spreading slowly across the napkin, bleeding into the edges like my patience. I wanted to speak, to shout, to tell her to move, but the weight of my son's small hand lying between hers held me back. If I scared him, if I woke him into a fight, it would be worse. So I sat, spine rigid, every muscle buzzing with restraint. "You should go rest," she added after a moment, her tone casual, like she was doing me a kindness. "You've been here long enough. I'll stay with him. He'll be fine with me." I turned my head sharply, meeting her eyes at last. There it was, the flicker of triumph she couldn't quite hide. She wanted me gone. She wanted me erased. The nurse's pen hesitated mid-scribble, then moved faster, as if writing could distract her from the storm thickening in the room. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, my voice steady but low. "That's interesting. You managed to replace me in less than 5 minutes." Her lips curled. "Don't be dramatic. You're tired. He needs calm right now, not tension. Let me handle this." Handle this. Like my son was an errand she had been assigned. Like I had failed at my only role. The words vibrated through me, pulling at every old scar she had carved over the years. Christmas dinners where she announced recipes as his childhood favorite, while ignoring mine. Family photos where she pulled him close and left me standing at the edge of the frame. Birthdays where she gave speeches about the importance of tradition, as if I were not even part of the tradition myself. Now here we were, in a hospital room, and she was still writing me out. The nurse finally spoke, her voice quiet. "Mrs. Carter, your daughter-in-law has been here since the beginning. She hasn't left his side." The words should have been enough. But my mother-in-law only smiled, a thin, practiced smile. "I know, she has tried, but a mother's strength can only last so long. I know my son. He needs someone who has done this before." Something inside me cracked. I rose from the chair slowly, the plastic squeaking against the linoleum. My hands were steady now. I walked to the table, picked up the folder I had carried in my bag since admission, and placed it gently beside the coffee cup. The papers inside rustled faintly. Consent forms, insurance details, the document listing me as the next of kin. My name was there in black ink. Not hers, mine. The nurse's eyes caught the movement. She understood. She gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible. My mother-in-law glanced at the folder, then away, pretending it didn't matter. But I saw the tightness in her jaw. I sat back down. My son stirred faintly, shifting under the blankets. His eyelashes trembled, his hand twitching. I reached out and laid my fingers lightly on his arm. For a moment, his breathing evened, his small body leaning unconsciously toward me. That was all the proof I needed. He knew. Even asleep, he knew where his mother was. The silence stretched again, heavier this time. My mother-in-law cleared her throat. "Well, you do look exhausted," she said finally, trying to regain her footing. "Why don't you at least get some proper rest? I can call you if anything changes." Her words dripped with false concern. I smiled thinly. "I'm not going anywhere. He will wake up and see me right here." For the first time, her eyes flickered with unease. She leaned back in the chair, arms folding across her chest. The nurse excused herself, promising to check in again in a few minutes. The door clicked shut, leaving just the two of us, and the steady beeping of the machine. I stared at the rise and fall of my son's chest. I breathed in with him, breathed out with him, steadying myself. I could feel her gaze on me, sharp as needles, but I didn't look at her. Not yet. I let the silence choke her instead. In that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't just about coffee, or chairs, or even a hospital room. It was about a pattern. Years of small cuts that had finally bled into something undeniable. She had tested me over and over, pushing to see if I would yield, if I would fade. And I had. Too many times. But not now. Not here. I looked at her then, directly, without flinching. "He knows who his mother is," I said quietly. "And so do you." Her lips parted, ready to argue, but no words came. She looked away first. That was when I felt it. The shift. Small, invisible to anyone outside the room, but powerful enough to steady my pulse. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown her out. But the ground beneath us had tilted, and she knew it. My son shifted again, murmured something incoherent, then settled. I smoothed the blanket over him, my hand gentle. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten. My patience had not. It was alive, sharp, waiting. I didn't know what would happen when my husband walked through that door later. I didn't know what excuse she would craft, what version of the story she would tell. But I knew this much. She had crossed a line, and I was done pretending it didn't matter. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving my son. "I'm not leaving," I repeated. My voice was calm, certain, and for the first time, she had no reply. The hospital room became strangely quiet after that. Machines kept humming, my son kept breathing, and my mother-in-law kept her arms folded like a queen stripped of her crown. On the surface, everything looked calm, but under my skin, memories started to crawl out. What had just happened was not an accident. It was the latest chapter of a book she had been writing for years. I thought back to the first time she tried to push me out of my own place. It was at our wedding. The photographer had lined everyone up for group pictures. She slipped right beside my husband, clutching his arms so tightly it looked like they were the bride and groom. I smiled in those photos, but when I looked at them later, the smile cracked. I looked like a guest. She looked like the center. It never stopped after that. When we bought our first house, she told neighbors it was her idea to help us choose it, even though she had only walked through once. At every barbecue, she announced how she taught her son to cook steak just right while I stood at the grill turning burgers. On my son's first birthday, she insisted on baking the cake herself. It arrived with her name piped in icing on the bottom corner. Made with love from Grandma. My hands shook as I sliced it, pretending it didn't matter. She has always had a talent for cloaking her moves in something sweet. People outside the family saw only a doting grandmother, a helpful mother, but I saw the sharp edges. I felt them. They came in whispers, in sideways glances, in the way she would compliment my husband while ignoring me in the same breath. "You look so tired, dear," she would say to me, then turn to him and beam. "Doesn't he look just like his father did at this age?" Sometimes I wondered if she truly hated me, or if she just couldn't stand not being the first woman in his life anymore. Either way, I was the obstacle, not the partner. She smiled at church, handed out cookies to the neighbors, praised her son in public, then carved at me in private. Always subtle, always deniable. The pattern wore me down. I used to second-guess myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I misunderstood. That was what my husband told me when I cried about it one night. "She doesn't mean it like that," he said. "She just has a strong personality." Strong personality was his gentle way of saying she could bulldoze anyone, and we were all supposed to shrug. But I didn't shrug in that hospital room. I couldn't, because this time it wasn't just about me. It was about my son. She wasn't satisfied taking family photos or baking birthday cakes. Now she wanted to claim motherhood itself. That was the line I would never let her cross. I remembered another time she nearly did. It was 2 summers ago, when my boy had a school recital. He was nervous about singing in front of everyone, so I promised I would sit right in the front row where he could see me. We arrived early, found our seats, and settled in. Then she appeared, sweeping down the aisle with that confident smile. She didn't ask. She just slipped into the chair beside him, leaving me 3 rows back. When he scanned the audience looking for me, he saw her instead. He waved shyly. She beamed, triumphant. I clapped loudly through the entire performance, but he didn't notice me until the very end. My throat ached for days. Those moments piled up like bricks, each one heavy, each one placed carefully to build a wall between me and the people I loved. She wasn't content to share. She needed to dominate. She needed to be first. And I, foolishly, kept letting her. But sitting in that chair, smelling antiseptic and watching my son fight for rest, I realized something. She thrived because I had been silent. I had mistaken politeness for strength. I had confused endurance with peace. All I had really done was hand her my place piece by piece until she thought it belonged to her. I traced the rim of the cold coffee cup with my finger, listening to her sigh heavily. She probably believed she could outweight me, that eventually I would give in, leave for a shower, a nap, a walk, and she would slide fully into my spot. That had been her way for years. Wait for me to tire, then take what mattered. But as I watched my son's chest rise and fall, I felt a different kind of exhaustion. Not the tiredness of hospital chairs and sleepless nights. A deeper one. The fatigue of being erased again and again. And in that exhaustion, I found clarity. This was not the first time she had stolen a moment, but it was the first time I had drawn a line she could not cross. I thought of the way she bragged to her friends. "My son always calls me first when something happens." That was never true, but she repeated it enough that maybe even she believed it. I thought of the way she once corrected me in front of my boy's teacher, insisting she knew his reading level better than I did. The teacher's confused eyes had landed on me, searching for explanation. I had smiled awkwardly and said nothing. That silence still tasted bitter in my mouth. Now, watching her glare at the folder of papers with my name written in bold black ink, I almost laughed. For once, there was something undeniable. She could roll her eyes at my feelings. She could dismiss my words as drama, but she could not erase my signature on those forms. She could not take my name off the line that mattered most. The past years paraded in front of me. The birthdays where she blew out the candles before my son did. The holidays where she handed him gifts with her picture taped to the wrapping paper. The dinners where she toasted to family, but looked only at him and herself. Each memory pressed harder against my ribs. No wonder the hospital scene hurt so much. It wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. I shifted in my chair, letting the legs scrape the floor a little louder than necessary. She flinched. Good. Let her feel the discomfort she had handed me 100 times before. For once, I wasn't shrinking back into silence. I was staring directly at the pattern, and I was done pretending it was just coincidence. This was deliberate. This was a war, waged quietly but persistently, and now it was out in the open. I didn't know how the next battle would unfold, but I knew something for certain. The years of being polite, of swallowing pain, of letting her win small victories for the sake of harmony, were over. In this hospital room, with my son lying between us, I finally understood. Harmony with her was impossible, and I was no longer willing to pay the price for pretending it was. I kept my eyes on the folder, its corners slightly bent from being stuffed into my bag. Those papers were more than forms. They were proof. My name printed again and again. Emergency contact. Legal guardian. Next of kin. All of it mine. She couldn't erase that no matter how long she sat in my chair. The nurse returned after a while, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She glanced at me first, then at my mother-in-law, and finally at the folder on the table. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction, but it was enough. She understood the silent message. I didn't have to raise my voice. The documents spoke louder than anything I could have shouted. My mother-in-law leaned back, arms crossed tightly across her chest. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice pitched high with forced calm. "I'm only here to help. He needs comfort, and you look too tired to give it. Let me do this for you." I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze without blinking. "You seem to forget who I am in this room. I'm his mother, not you." The nurse cleared her throat. "For any medical updates, we'll continue to go through you, Mrs. Carter," she said to me pointedly. Her tone was professional, but the firmness in it made my mother-in-law's lips press into a thin line. I picked up the folder, flipped it open, and slid a paper forward. "Here," I said quietly to the nurse, "in case there's any confusion later." My hand was steady as I tapped the line with my name. "All decisions, all permissions, come to me, no one else." The nurse nodded, took the paper, and slipped it into her clipboard. It was an ordinary motion, but I saw how my mother-in-law flinched at the sound of the paper sliding into its slot. That was the sound of her illusion cracking. She tried to laugh, a brittle sound. "There's no need to make this so formal. We're family. We should trust each other." I smiled thinly. "Exactly. And trust means not replacing me the moment I step out for coffee." The air shifted after that. Even the machines seemed louder, their beeps echoing like punctuation to every unspoken word. My son stirred again, his eyes fluttering open for a brief second. He whispered, "Mom?" so faintly it was almost lost under the hum of the ventilator. I leaned close, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "I'm right here." His lips curved slightly before he drifted off again. That one word, "Mom," cut deeper than any argument. It was proof, raw and undeniable, that he knew me. Not as a stand-in, not as a helper, but as the person who had been there all along. My mother-in-law looked away, her nails tapping impatiently against the chair's armrest. The door opened again. My husband walked in, hair disheveled, shirt wrinkled from hours at work. His eyes darted from me to his mother. "What's going on?" he asked, sensing the tension thick enough to choke. Before she could answer, I spoke. "She decided to take my place while I was gone. Told the nurse he only needed her." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. He turned toward his mother. "Mom?" She gave a tight smile. "I was only comforting him." She overreacted. "You know how tired she island. She can't handle everything herself." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but my voice stayed calm. "Read the forms, Daniel. Look at who the hospital recognizes as his guardian. Look at who he called for when he woke up." My husband's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking suddenly smaller. "Mom, maybe you should step back a little." Her face hardened. "Step back? After everything I've done for him? After all the nights I stayed awake when he was a baby so you two could rest? He's mine too." "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through hers. "He is my son. I carried him. I raised him. I sat here through every hour of this surgery. You may be his grandmother, but that does not give you the right to erase me." The words hung heavy in the room. My husband looked between us, caught in the middle. The nurse, sensing the storm about to break, excused herself with a polite nod and slipped out. Silence pressed in. The steady beep of the monitor was the only sound. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened. "You're ungrateful," she spat softly. "I give, and this is how you repay me?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped together. "Gratefulness doesn't mean surrendering my place. If you wanted respect, you should have respected me first." Her mouth opened, but no words came. For once, she was speechless. I let the silence expand, filling every corner of the room until even my husband shifted uncomfortably. I reached for my son's hand, warm and small beneath mine. He didn't stir, but I felt his pulse steady. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing with him, anchoring myself. Then I looked up again. From this moment on, things change. I'm done letting you push me aside. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. It was a warning, a promise, and a challenge all at once. But I didn't flinch. Not anymore. That night, as I sat in the hospital chair with the fluorescent lights buzzing above, I realized something important. A war doesn't always start with shouts. Sometimes it starts with a coffee cup, a stolen seat, and the quiet decision to never let it happen again. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its second hand ticking steadily forward. The real battle had only just begun, and she knew it as well as I did. The hours that followed were heavy, filled with silence broken only by the hum of machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses. My mother-in-law stayed seated, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She wasn't leaving. She was waiting me out, convinced I would falter. I didn't. I sat steady at my son's side, my hand resting lightly on his blanket. Every so often, he stirred, muttered a half-dreamed word, and each time it was, "Mom." That was enough fuel to keep me anchored. She heard it too, though she pretended not to. I noticed her jaw tighten each time the word left his lips. When my husband came back later with a bag of clothes, he looked at both of us like he had stepped into a storm. He tried to diffuse it with a weak smile. "How's he doing?" he asked, his voice trembling with fatigue. I answered first. "He's resting. Stable. The doctors are pleased." His mother leaned forward, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "He only settled once I sat beside him. Poor thing. He just needed his grandmother's touch." I almost laughed at the audacity. "Instead," I said calmly, "he called for me when he woke. That is what settled him." My husband froze, his eyes flicking between us. He wanted peace, but peace was no longer an option. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and sighed. "Let's not do this here." Oh, but here was exactly where it needed to happen. "This is where it started," I said firmly. "And this is where it ends." My mother-in-law turned on me, her eyes sharp. "You think you can shut me out, but you'll need me. You always have. Who was there when the baby was sick and you were too exhausted to move? Who helped cook meals when you went back to work? Who has more experience raising children than you ever will?" Her voice rose with each question, until the nurse peeked in through the door. I lifted a hand and whispered, "It's fine," though my pulse was hammering. I stood slowly, smoothing my shirt, and stepped closer to her. "Experience doesn't give you ownership. Help doesn't give you the right to replace me. Every hour I've spent here, every sacrifice I've made, that's mine, not yours. And he knows it. That's why, even half asleep, the only word he says is Mom." She blinked hard, her composure cracking. For a moment she looked smaller, almost vulnerable. Then the mask snapped back into place. "You'll regret this," she hissed softly. I leaned in, close enough that only she could hear. "Maybe. But I'd rather regret standing firm than regret letting my son grow up confused about who his mother island." Her breath caught. She didn't reply. The night deepened. My husband eventually dozed off in the extra chair, his head lolling to one side. The nurse dimmed the lights, leaving only the glow of the monitors. It was just me and her again, the two of us locked in quiet combat across the bed of the boy who tied us together and divided us at the same time. At one point she whispered, almost to herself, "He'll always choose me." He didn't even look at her. I stroked my son's hair and whispered back, "We'll see." The morning came slowly, the hallway outside filling with the sounds of carts and voices. Sunlight slipped in through the blinds, cutting sharp stripes across the room. My son stirred again, his eyes fluttering open. His lips cracked into a faint smile. "Mom," he whispered. I bent close, kissed his forehead, and said, "I'm right here." He reached weakly for my hand, and I gave it to him. He squeezed with surprising strength, then drifted back into sleep. My mother-in-law looked away, blinking fast. She pretended to search her bag for something, but her hands shook. That was the moment I knew I had won, not with shouting or force, but with quiet certainty. My place was mine, undeniable and unshakable. She could scheme, she could whisper, she could try to outweight me, but she couldn't undo the bond written in my son's smallest gesture. I sat back, the exhaustion heavy but clean. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. She knew. And the silence between us told me she hated that knowledge more than any words I could have thrown at her. Later, as the doctor came in to check on my son, he glanced at me for updates. Not her. Only me. She shifted in her chair, invisible for the first time in her own eyes. I don't know if she realized what she lost in that moment. Maybe she still believes she can claw it back at the next holiday, the next gathering, the next fragile moment when she thinks I'll be too tired to fight. Maybe she'll keep trying, because power has always been her comfort. But as I sat there, the steady rhythm of my son's breath guiding me, I understood something. I didn't need to win every battle. I just needed to never surrender again. And I won't.